Now, welcome everyone. Appreciate your tuning in today to this virtual press conference here in Atlanta. First of all, let me address why we're here. Throughout this pandemic, we've sought to find the right balance between the health and safety of our players, the community that's involved in producing NBA basketball, and of course our fans, along with the economic interests as well of our community. And add into that social justice issues. And so all of that's been on our mind since almost a year ago when we shut down the NBA. Of course, last season, we ended up finishing down in Orlando, Florida on a campus or a bubble. And this season, we concluded that because of the length of the season, we really couldn't operate in that format over such a long period of time. And so, of course, we're playing in home arenas. And as to the All-Star game itself, this is not the experience we're all used to when it comes to All-Star, which began as All-Star Sunday, then became a weekend, and then became almost an entire week of festivities as we've moved around the country. We have a very condensed version of All-Star this year, which will be tomorrow night, beginning at 6:30 Eastern. We're going to begin with 2 skill events, and then move into the game and have a slam dunk contest at halftime. Again, we feel we've struck the appropriate balance here, looking out for the interests of everyone involved, and we're very appreciative of the Atlanta Hawks, Tony Ressler, the principal governor, Steve Kuhn, the president, and of course the folks here at State Farm Arena for their willingness to host us over the last few days. On the social justice point, we made a decision, and it was part of the reason why we're here in Atlanta, that this was an opportunity to focus on the HBCUs, the historically Black college and universities. There are 101 HBCUs in the United States, and about 25 of those colleges and universities will be represented in the arena tomorrow night. There are approximately a quarter of a million students attending those HBCUs right now. And the vast majority of those schools are based here in the South. In fact, there's 6 HBCUs here in the Atlanta area. They include Clark Atlanta University, Morehouse College, Spelman College, Morris Brown College, and others, and they will be well represented here tomorrow night. I should point out that Earl Lloyd, the very first Black player to play on the court in an NBA game, was a graduate of an HBCU, West Virginia State University. We are going to have Robert Covington here from the Portland Trailblazers. Will be participating in the Skills Challenge. He's a graduate of Tennessee State University. And in addition, Chris Paul who began his collegiate career at Wake Forest, is finishing up his degree at Winston-Salem State University. So HBCU are represented by our current players on the floor. In addition, tomorrow night, our 3 referees who will be working the game are all graduates of HBCUs, and we have approximately 120 HBCU alums who either work at one of our teams or at the league office. And in addition, we will be contributing over $3 million to the HBCUs for various rewards and skill challenges tomorrow night that the players will earn on the floor, but that will total at least $3 million. And maybe even more important than the money, we'll be focusing enormous amount of attention on these schools. Turner Broadcasting throughout the pregame show and the game itself will be highlighting HBCU graduates, the schools themselves, and of course the All-Star game and festivities are distributed in roughly 215 countries and territories. And so the exposure, I think, will be incredibly valuable. Speaking of HBCUs, we lost a dear friend of ours earlier this year, who was a graduate of Jackson State University. That's Sekou Smith, someone who appeared on air for NBA TV and also wrote for NBA.com. I know he's a dear friend to many of the media who cover us, who's a close friend of mine and a very sad loss. Also on the HBCU front, Atlanta native Vernon Jordan, who was a good friend to the NBA, passed this week. He was a graduate of Howard University Law School. I also want to make note of the loss of a close friend, Mike Pearl. He was the executive producer of Turner Sports from 1994 to 2003. He really put his imprint on inside the NBA. He was a legendary sports broadcaster, a member of the Broadcasting Hall of Fame, and again, someone who was very close to the NBA family and stayed close to us with some work he did at ABC and ESPN after he left Turner. So to those three gentlemen's families, our deepest condolences. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, we'll start with our first question from Tim Reynolds.
Hi, Adam. Tim Reynolds with the AP. It's good to see you, if only virtually.
Thank you, Tim.
My question's about next season, if you don't mind. It's kind of in two parts. Is the plan still, is that still the target to make next season as quote unquote normal as can be with an October start and a June finish? And to that, is there any appetite yet for the league to talk about resuming the China games or going to Japan or the Europe game next season? How much of a impediment do you think international travel will be for the league next year? Thank you.
Sure, Tim, and thanks for joining us. First of all, no plans yet to travel for next season. And in all likelihood, we won't travel internationally until the following season at the earliest. But the plan remains to try to resume our season as close to so-called normal as possible next year. It was one of the reasons why in setting the schedule this year, we decided to stop in mid-July. We both wanted to allow those players who wanted to participate in the Olympics to do so. But in addition, we realized that if we were going to get back on cycle and the players were going to get the appropriate downtime before the season began, we didn't want to go deep into the summer or fall as we did last season. And frankly, I'm fairly optimistic at this point that we will be able to start on time, and that we have roughly, half of our teams have fans in their arenas right now. And if vaccines continue on the pace they are, and they continue to be as effective as they have been against the virus and its variants, we're hopeful that we'll have relatively full arenas next season as well.
Mark Medina.
Hi, Adam. Mark Medina here with USA Today. Good to see you.
You too.
What do you think it's going to take for the diversity and inclusion to improve in the coaching, front office, and ownership ranks?
It's going to take certainly more than we're doing now. We've made progress over the years, but we're constantly looking at how we can do better. The Coaches Association is working closely with us on this, and we don't. First of all, I don't think there are any quick fixes. I think we want to appropriately respect everyone who's involved, and there's no coach that I know who wants to get hired based on his skin color, but they want a fair opportunity. And part of that is ensuring that we're developing coaches appropriately in the pipeline, that they're getting the right opportunities to interview, the right opportunities to network, as other coaches have historically done. So as I said, I don't think there's any doubt there's more work to be done. I'll only add that I think that the league deserves to be looked at as a whole. I mean, of course, the head coaching position is critically important and as representatives of the organization. But I think if you look across the league and its teams in terms of the progress we've made in terms of diversity, I would hold us up to virtually any other company. I mean, again, it doesn't mean there isn't more work to be done and we don't need some fresh approaches. But I also think we've made a fair amount of progress over the years.
Davide.
Hey, Commissioner, good to see you virtually. Davide Chinellato, La Gazzetta dello Sport from Italy. Given the schedule for the second part of the season and how tight it will be in the playoffs, Is the bubble, going back to the bubble, something you guys are considering?
We're not considering going back to a bubble right now. I don't rule anything out, just because one thing we've all come to understand over the last year is that the virus is firmly in charge. And so we need to adjust to circumstances as they present themselves. But as I said in response to the prior question, I'd say maybe for the first time in the past year, I'm fairly optimistic right now that as we see fans returning to our arenas, as we see public health officials across the country begin to open up sporting events, theaters, restaurants, other forms of entertainment, I feel pretty good that we're going to continue a pace. And by the time we reach the playoffs in mid-May, things will even be considerably better than they are now. And also, obviously, at least here in the United States, we've been making excellent progress in terms of vaccinations, and that will be very helpful in getting people back in the arenas.
Vince Goodwill.
Good afternoon, Adam. Good to see you. Vincent Goodwill from Yahoo Sports. Almost as a follow-up to Mark Medina's question, what do you think the biggest impediment is for this almost glass ceiling that Black coaches have across the league? You've mentioned the numbers across the board going higher, but that almost makes it seem worse that they're not able to break through, especially considering the number used to be higher in the middle part of last decade.
Well, first of all, there shouldn't be an impediment, as we all know. I'd say, as a practical matter, what we're seeing happen is that, and I think this is in part human nature, people tend to turn to the people who they know best and they're most familiar with. And I think that in certain cases, you have a network of relationships that go back many years. And to the extent that people aren't part of those networks, they're clearly at a disadvantage in the process. And one of the things the league can do in working with our teams, therefore, is focus on a better process that ensures that everyone has an equal opportunity to sort of join the fraternity, so to speak, and that you're not going to get to be a head coach in this league unless you serve most likely as an assistant coach first, or you've been a top player in the league. And so I realize a lot of these things don't happen automatically, that it requires real focus and intentionality, that, and that's one thing the league has learned over the years, that you have to be vigilant. You have to constantly be talking about these things. You have to keep looking at the data. I mean, I think grand statements aren't all that helpful. Whether from me or for others, that it comes down to very specific tactics, using the opportunity whenever we talk to our teams to go back to the data and say, here's where we are, here's the number of assistant coaches, this is how these processes have worked. And that's, I think, what is necessary. I mean, I like with most things in life, there are no real magic bullets here. And as I said earlier, I just want to make sure we're respecting everyone who's part of the process too, because I just lastly, I'll say I don't want to create a process which people are checking the boxes, and that someone becomes the Black candidate who got interviewed but didn't get the job. Everyone knows that person wasn't really going to get the job, but somebody went through a process to appease the league office or somebody else. So it requires real engagement. That's just how I'll conclude.
Jabari.
Thanks, Vincent.
Adam, how are you? Thanks for doing this on a Saturday.
Sure.
Just a quick question for you. What's the financial status, or how would you describe it, of your league, considering that 40% of the revenue is still kind of missing?
The long-term health of the league is very solid, but between last year and this year, we're looking at considerable losses. I generally don't talk about that publicly because teams are largely privately held, and we're not suggesting that's anybody else's issue but ours. But last season and this season has required a significant investment on the part of the team owners. They accept that. Players will end up taking a reduction in salary this season because they are partners with the league and teams on revenue. League executives, team executives have all taken haircuts on their salary, but I think when we all step back, we feel very fortunate to be working under these circumstances. And my sense is the players feel the same way.
Christos?
Hello, Mr. Silver. Thank you very much for your time.
Sure.
Christos Charles from Greece. I would like to ask you, how could you describe your relationship with FIBA and Mr. Zaglis about the upcoming Olympic Games, and how satisfied you are about the first half of the season?
What was the last part of the question? I heard the FIBA part.
Christos, can you say the second part, please?
I think you got muted.
Okay. How
There you go.
satisfied you are about the first half of the season?
First of all, in terms of the first half of the season, it went essentially as we had expected. We ended up playing 95% of our games. We knew we were going to get positive cases for players and staff members when we were operating under the bubble. I felt our protocols held up as well as we could have hoped. It seems that we are able, through our testing protocols, to catch infections very early. The goal is to catch infections before people become infectious and prevent spread. And so we feel we've done that fairly effectively. So I feel good about the first half of the season. Again, I credit to the schedule makers who had the foresight to divide the season in two parts. And so we were able to have the flexibility to push games into the second half of the season. Obviously, we won't have that same flexibility in the second half. So something watching for closely. In terms of FIBA, we have an excellent relationship with them. We're partners in growing the game on a global basis. And we anticipate the Olympics going forward as scheduled in Japan. And again, that's of course an election for our players to make should they want to participate. But, and sometimes people think in terms of the NBA, of course, about the US team, but our players compete for dozens of teams internationally. And, you know, again, based on the progress we've made, I expect that they'll have an excellent competition this summer in Tokyo.
Dwayne Rankin?
Thanks. Appreciate this, Adam. Wanted to ask about the officiating because it's been under scrutiny here lately. You know, guys upset with the technicals and things of that nature. Do you just chalk this up as just part of a season, just part of a stressful season, or is there a cause for concern?
Well, first of all, in terms of the data, which we obviously look very closely at, there's nothing aberrational happening, whether in terms of accuracy of calls or numbers of technicals on the floor. But I will say everyone is under enormous pressure this year. And the officials, you know, aren't exempt from that. They are also operating under our sort of work quarantine protocols. One of the things we've learned over the last year is that the mental stress is incredibly tough on everyone involved. And I think in some cases you have some younger officials too, who maybe are still trying to calibrate their relationships with players. So I'm not particularly concerned necessarily with the calls on the floor. I'm always concerned about the members of our larger community and how they're interacting with each other. I think it's also the case, and it's not a secret, that maybe where a little bit of the shorter fuses come in is that when you have arenas that are packed with 19,000 people and you can hardly hear the person next to you, when a player may be used to saying something directed at an official that the official wouldn't typically hear. And then the issue becomes in largely empty arenas, when they do hear what the player says, how is it they should react? And I think it's something we're talking about in the league office. I think sometimes when I hear the commentators after the fact talking about a technical that's called on the floor, it's what they're saying is very different than what I see in the report that's on my desk. And I'm not anxious to necessarily repeat those words, but everybody's got to find the right balance in a pandemic and be mindful of the stress. I'll end by saying, and I could have added this in response to the last question, that basketball's been off the charts. I mean, that's what's so interesting. I think we saw it first in the bubble, and that was attributed to the fact that the players maybe were getting more sleep and rest and weren't traveling through multiple time zones. But to me, that's continued this season. So despite everything that's going on, and despite little, chippiness or maybe around the officiating, I think overall the quality of the games have been great. So I'm pleased about that.
Heather Yako.
Hi, Adam. Thank you for your time. I just have a question, a quick follow-up. It's been about a year since the start of the pandemic, from the shutdown to the bubble and to now All-Star. Essentially, as a commissioner, you've led the blueprint on having to navigate through COVID-19, not just for the NBA, but for other leagues who followed suit. Was there any pressure from investors or even the legacy as you, a commissioner, in order to proceed with the All-Star game, knowing it was highly unfavored by most of the players?
There was not pressure, certainly, from the teams. In fact, teams end up being largely on the side of players. It's a bit lonely as the commissioner, because the extent their players are saying, we'd rather not play, often the teams reflect those same sentiments. But it's my job to look out for the overall interest of the league. And as I said earlier, I haven't made a secret out of the fact that economic interests are a factor. I'll add, though, that to me, when I say economic interests are a factor, it's less to do with the economics of one Sunday night on TNT in the United States. It has more to do with the larger brand value of the NBA and the fact that this is our #1 fan engagement event of the year. I mean, because we went forward with All-Star, not only did roughly 100 million people vote for the All-Stars on a global basis, based on past ratings, well over 100 million people will watch the game, and the ancillary competitions will have over 1 billion social media views and engagements. And so it's sort of what we do. And so for me, it would have been a bigger deal not to have it. I mean, and especially since we know how to operate a bubble, and we have called our mini bubble here in Atlanta. From the moment the players land till when they leave, they're going to be only operating between the hotel and the arena. Once we got to the point where we felt we could do it safely, it seemed that we definitely should go forward. We should do it for our fans, and we should do it for our business. And I know that some players have made public comments, of course, suggesting they'd rather not be at All-Star. But I'm almost 30 years in the league. The guys, many have told me directly, they're thrilled to be All-Stars, and they recognize their careers are relatively short. And for some of them, there's several first-time All-Stars here. There's many who only have been an opportunity to be an All-Star a couple of times. And I even think for them, the opportunity to gather together here, even over a short period of time, is truly meaningful. So maybe it should be judged when people are looking back on what this meant to them, as opposed to what sort of initial reactions were from some of the players.
Absolutely. And to just quickly follow up on those players, what is your response to LeBron's comments, feeling that proceeding with the All-Star game was essentially a slap in the face?
As I've said earlier, it would be incredibly hypocritical of me to say to LeBron that you should speak out on issues that are important to you, but not ones when you're critical of the league. So we're all part of a community. I respect him and his point of view. I also, at the same time, I appreciate his professionalism. I don't know if you had a chance to see him as captain and general manager of his team proceed with the draft. He did it in good humor. He took it very seriously. And my sense is he's going to be here, as he always is, as a top-notch professional and engaged in the game. So I think, again, I respect his point of view, but it seems like issues that can be worked out in the family, so to speak.
Joe Varden.
Hi, Adam. I have a couple questions related to the vaccine. First of all, I'm unaware, I don't know, maybe if you know, if any players or coaches or assistant coaches have had it yet. And then more generally speaking, I'm curious how the league's effort to educate and convince a large majority of the players to take it, how that's going. And then finally, as the vaccine, is rolled out and more people get it, do your players have to be vaccinated for you to refill arenas? And the Zoom stuff that we have to do, all that, that's not that important so much as the fans and all that. But do the players have to be vaccinated for all that stuff to happen too?
Sure. So thanks for those questions, Joe. First of all, there is no player that I am aware of that has been vaccinated yet. Number two, there are some coaches who have been vaccinated as well as some team personnel, and the coaches who have been vaccinated, it's because they were age appropriate under the protocols in the jurisdictions where they live. And there are other team personnel, again, it's state by state, but because they're either healthcare providers, we obviously have doctors working with the teams, et cetera. So there has been some members of the community that have been vaccinated. In terms of the education efforts, those are ongoing. I think ultimately these are personal decisions that players need to make, just like everyone in our communities need to make. And we see our role together with the Players Association, providing them with the best possible information and also encouraging them to seek out information on their own, that they have personal physicians, others that they may rely on. So there's Dr. Leroy Sims, who works with the NBA, has been conducting a series of Zoom calls with the teams. And I know the teams have been also providing their own resources to players, along with the Players Association, to help them make those decisions. I don't think that every player certainly needs to be vaccinated for fans to come back. I mean, that's not anything that the health authorities have suggested to us. I think we're now fairly familiar with those kinds of engagements that can lead to people, getting the virus from someone else. There may be a herd immunity issue, herd immunity aspect to this, which means whether in our community or in jurisdictions that a certain percentage of people who have been vaccinated or have antibodies will cover others. I also think, being realistic in around the NBA, as I said, we have no plans to mandate that players get vaccinated, and for any sort of large scale required vaccinations to take place, that could only happen with the Players Association. As I said, we've only talked about educational efforts. So I don't see every player needing to get vaccinated as an impediment to fans returning to the arena. No more do I think the fact that every fan won't be vaccinated is an impediment to fans coming back to the arena. I think as a combination of vaccines, antibodies, herd immunity in communities, proper safety and cleanliness protocols, we'll be able to return to something that looks a lot closer to normal beginning next season, at least based on the information I have available to me today.
Eric Fisher.
Thanks, Joe.
Yes, good afternoon. Eric Fisher, Sport Business. My question is regarding China. And what the current state of the league's relationship in China is. We've had the reports, obviously, that CCTV is set to resume coverage tomorrow, but more broadly, after everything that's happened, where do you stand in China?
Eric, so CCTV resumed their coverage during the finals, as you'll recall, at the end of last season, games 5 and 6 were back on CCTV. We have our existing relationship with Tencent, which I know, as you know, is a streaming service in China, which has been carrying our games throughout this season. And our business has continued there. For me, no different than the reason we conduct All-Star here in the United States for fan engagement. We have hundreds of millions of fans in China, and we see it as our business to serve those fans. And our general philosophy and our mission is, if we can improve people's lives through basketball, we think it's appropriate for us to be continuing to export our games to China. So while our values remain the same, and our business continues, and it's largely the business of exporting American basketball and the culture that comes with it to China. And it's enjoyed, as I said, by tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of people in China who continue to watch it. And so that's our current status.
Tim Bontemps.
Hey, Adam. Good to see you, virtually at least.
Hey, Tim. You too.
Quick question for you to kind of follow up on what Joe said. I know you also said to Ramona this week, you're not planning on any mandatory vaccine situation for anybody. But with that being said, given you have had a bunch of teams have to have stoppages throughout the year, I know you've talked about being optimistic about where things are going, but is it realistic to not have any kind of widespread vaccine in place ahead of the playoffs, given the potential for teams having to be shut down during them as a result of this? And also kind of sort of with that, how will you guys handle that during the playoffs when it seems like you have a pretty regimented time for to get those playoffs finished on the schedule that you want also?
Well, Tim, I think it is realistic, even if we didn't have required vaccinations, because of course, none of the players have been vaccinated now, and we've only had to postpone a relatively small percentage of our games. I mean, so we know that for the most part, a testing protocol together with mask wearing and all the other precautions we're taking largely works. And the NCAA tournament is going to be played this year, again, without vaccinations for their players. So to me, we'll make additional progress if players get vaccinated, but it certainly doesn't require that they all get vaccinated. And I also anticipate, and we're seeing this now, both I think in the actual numbers of people getting vaccinated in the United States and opinion polls, that people are becoming more willing to get vaccinated. I think as to those who've been hesitators, I think as tens of millions of people now in the United States have gotten the vaccine, that people are seeing, at least in the short term, what the impact is. And they're hearing about how incredibly effective these vaccines are. My hunch is that most players ultimately will choose to get vaccinated. It's a personal decision, but I think especially when really it's built into your question, when they see the alternative. I mean, one thing I should note, in addition to the personal health benefits, the family health benefits, the economic benefits to getting vaccinated, because of the protocols we have in place, that they're incredibly burdensome on our players and on our teams. But for example, the CDC has already announced that if you've been vaccinated, you don't need to quarantine as a close contact. As you know, many of our players have had to sit out not because they tested positive, but because they were required to quarantine because of a close contact. So in addition, right now, as we operate under this so-called work quarantine protocol, where players are largely only going between their homes and the arenas, once they get vaccinated, they'll be able to do more in their communities. And that's something we've already begun talking to the Players Association about. So there'll be some real advantages and benefits to getting vaccinated for the players. Again, they have to make personal decisions at the end of the day. And I take that very seriously, and I take concerns very seriously. But my sense is most will ultimately decide that it's in their interest to get vaccinated.
Jeff Zilgett.
Hey, Adam.
Hey, Jeff.
Yeah, how are you doing?
Good, thank you.
Yep. What are your plans for Summer League? Is it feasible to have a Summer League in Las Vegas this year? And short, if that's not possible, is there any way to hold, some kind of team mini camp for rookies or younger undrafted or unsigned players looking to catch on in the league?
We don't have concrete plans yet for the Summer League. It's something we began to think about. Certainly, we would love to pick back up our Summer League in Las Vegas. We know that the teams very much value it as an opportunity to see, as you said, the undrafted players, and also to get some of the drafted players some time on the court. I mean, this is going to be a very difficult draft for our teams, abbreviated college seasons, not the same opportunity to scout and visit with players that they have had historically. So I think we're going to end up as some combination of built into your question of maybe an abbreviated summer league, mini camps, and other opportunities. I think everything's on the table now. And as we're seeing progress in our communities, I'm increasingly hopeful we'll be able to do put together some of those events. But I know for our teams from a competitive standpoint, it's critically important that they get an opportunity to see those players, that particular ones who aren't in the 2-round draft. And then for the ones who do get drafted, get them an opportunity to start, putting some court time in before the season starts.
We're going to take 2 last questions. First
Thanks,
one
Jeff.
is Sam Amick.
Hello, Adam. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too, Sam.
2 quick ones for you. For one, Kyrie Irving's social media post about the logo had sparked a conversation about, just whether or not it should be changed. I wonder, at the league level, has there been any recent and meaningful discussion about that? And then also on the Minnesota front, widely known that, Glenn Taylor is looking to possibly sell the team, and Kevin Garnett the other day expressing his frustration with the process. And, in situations like those, you tend to occasionally get involved. Are you monitoring that? Are you part of that situation? How do you see it?
On your second question on Glenn Taylor, I have been part of that, and I will let Glenn speak for himself. I mean, he did have discussions with some groups about potentially buying the franchise, and I think Glenn has waffled over the years. I think both he loves owning the Timberwolves and being part of the league, and at the same time, I think he's sort of looking out to the future and just trying to be responsible to his family and the community in terms of next generation ownership. I was dismayed to read that back and forth between Kevin Garnett and Glenn Taylor. It was obviously Kevin sounded frustrated, and Glenn said he had never heard directly from him. So yes, that is an opportunity for me to get directly involved, and I will. In terms of your first question, there are no ongoing discussions right now at the league office about changing the logo. I certainly saw Kyrie Irving's comments. And again, everything changes over time. So, nothing's permanently fixed, but the logo is iconic. As you know, we're distributed globally. Even changing the logo, purely even from a legal standpoint, isn't an easy exercise. Not that that should be the impediment. The suggestion around Kobe Bryant, of course, gives me an opportunity to remind everyone that last year we named the All-Star MVP trophy after Kobe Bryant. No doubt one of the greatest ever in this league, and someone we all knew so well. So sure he would be on the list, no doubt, if we were thinking about changing it. But it doesn't feel to me that this is the appropriate moment to be changing the logo, even. And while it's never been officially declared that the logo is Jerry West, it sure looks a lot like him, and he still is thriving in our community. And I know he's so self-effacing and has said, please change it if that's what people want to do. But it just doesn't feel like the right moment to be thinking about that. It doesn't mean that, again, that we won't turn back and look at it at some point. But to me, I appreciate the sentiments, but it feels like the logo is appropriate right now.
Last question from Gary Washburn.
Hey, Adam, how's it going?
Hey, good, Gary. Thanks.
Good to see you. I know this is probably in the back burner, but has there been any decision with the Players Association about changing the one and done rule and allowing high school players to enter the draft? And secondly, there's been talk of a person developing a high school league where he would pay high school players. What are your thoughts on players getting paid under the age of 17, 18? What's the NBA's kind of approach on this?
On the one and done, there have been discussions with the Players Association. Former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, in essence, brought Michelle and I together on that issue because she chaired a commission on behalf of the NCAA to look at the issue. And it's as is well known now, she made a recommendation that we return to 18 as our minimum age. And as a result, Michelle and I did discuss it. We discussed it directly with Secretary Rice, and we both agreed that as part of the process of looking at a new collective bargaining agreement, we should discuss that issue. And it's one where I think we're both on both sides of the issue sometimes in terms of what it will mean for the league having, younger players in the league. That it sort of brings to the forefront really your second question in terms of the development cycle of players. 25% of the players in this league come from outside the United States, and in most of their jurisdictions, they become professionals not at 18, but often at 14. And it's a whole different development cycle, and it's something that, of course, we pay a lot of attention to. And so I don't have sort of a fundamental any fundamental opposition to paying younger people, who have a unique skill and where other people are benefiting from their services. So my reaction to the new league is that optionality is good. I think for the NBA, we of course in our G League do allow players to come directly from high school. So minimum age 19 NBA, and it's 18 in the NBA. In fact, we created Team Ignite in the G League as an opportunity for players who choose not to go to college and want to become professionals. They can go directly into the G League and be well compensated. And under the theory too, that in addition to being compensated for their services, they can focus full time on the potential opportunity to play in the NBA. And we recognize that's not for everyone. I mean, there may be the player who either is not at that skill level yet where he's been identified as sort of a clear prospect, or, there's other young people who grow a lot, at that age or whatever else, or want to go to college. To me, options are a good thing. And I think for the younger high school player, if they can see an opportunity to play basketball and make money and get educated at the same time, I think for us right now, the NBA, we don't want to be in the business of paying minors. I think it doesn't feel right for us right now, in part because it's complicated, and making sure that those young people, since they aren't of the age of consent, are getting the proper guidance and the support to make those kind of decisions, because it may mean giving up college eligibility, for example, at a young age to play professionally. So I think it's generally good for the community to have optionality, and especially when very solid people, which appears to be the case in this league that's just been announced, are backing it and behind it. That's one thing we will pay a lot of attention to, because those young players are potentially the future of our league, and so we want to make sure that both on the court and off the court, they're getting the right mentoring and guidance. But overall, I think it's good for the game. It's more focus on the game, and there's especially all that's happening now in digital media, social media, new streaming services. There's definitely interest in this content. So we're paying attention to that. Thank you, Gary.
Great. Thanks, Adam. Transcripts for this press conference will be available on Media Central shortly. We appreciate all of you for joining in, and enjoy the All-Star game tomorrow night. Have a good evening.